So this talk is, it relates to Joslin's current research using scenography to understand the experience of urban space. And it's called the Scenographic City, Making Sense of Urban Experience Using Scenography. And so I'll hand over to you, Joslin. Welcome to the Department of Theatre, Film and Television Studies at Aberystwyth.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks very much for inviting me. I'm sorry not to be able to travel to you in person, but yeah, anyway, this is the way of things these days. So I'm just going to try and make sure I can connect to my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. Is that all right? Thanks, Andrew. I'm just going to move that out of the way. Great. Okay, so yes, thanks for the introduction. And as Andrew says, this relates to what I'm doing with my research now. I just thought, though, I would say a little bit about where this has come from, because my background is that I trained as a designer and worked as a designer for a good few years. And then when I came into academia and started a PhD, a practice PhD, I was really concerned, or really focused on thinking about how is it that scenography communicates to audiences. Yeah, so I came in at a time when we were talking very much about scenography in a theatrical context, communicating through kind of metonymic or metaphorical means, thinking very much of the sort of ways in which Dennis Kennedy was talking about scenography when he published his Looking at Shakespeare book, a really good book, by the way, but very much of the view that scenography is about what designers do, and how spectators then read back from what it was that designers have encoded in a design. And as a working designer, I was very keen as well to try and understand what I knew kind of tacitly to be a much more kind of phenomenological experience of working with scenographic images. I wanted to get at what spectators engage with and sense, their bodily experience, and the kind of extent to which that's a co-creative experience, an event, a thing in becoming, actually, rather than a complete artifact. So I think through that PhD work, and that's kind of sort of set the foundation for things that I've been doing since, I was developing an understanding of scenography as a coming together of bodies of all kinds, human and non-human, connecting. So it's very much founded on the idea of the agency and liveliness of materials and of the processes of mattering, and also importantly, I think, on the role that spectators play. So all sorts of post-dramatic, multimedia, site-based examples of work have, I think, really foregrounded the work that audiences do, the role of audiences as interpreters of that kind of work, and very much drawing on subjective experience, as Micah Blaker has talked about in her Visuality in the Theatre book. We always see more than is there. It includes projections, fantasies, desires, and fears. So very much bringing ourselves always to thinking about what we see in scenography. So scenography predominantly then, in the way that I think about it, is based on an embodied experience through a dynamic interaction of bodies, environments, and materials. I've been trying to then think about how far that relates to just everyday experience outside the theatre, outside, in fact, any theatrical event of any kind. So I'm just going to move that because I'm not quite sure if that's in the way of you or not. Yeah, thinking about how any of that might apply actually in a daily sense as I'm walking around the city. And I'm very struck here with thinking about how geographers are also concerned to now be thinking about how cities work, and try and make a connection really between what I've been thinking about in theatrical scenography and in urban studies. So this is kind of, I think, a useful kind of focus really for thinking about what cities do. And this quote from Seeing Like a City really highlights, I think, not just the fact that cities are more than just human presences, but that they consist of different modes, different intersecting modes of existence. And you'll see I'll pick that up further along in this talk, but that's just as a sort of marker really for to begin with. So I'm interested to see how can scenography help us understand the quotidian experience of urban life, and I'm going to bring together my understanding of expanded scenography and other people's as well, not just mine, and the some of the strands of thinking in geography, particularly interest in the sensory urban. But there is, I think it's worth saying to start with, there's a long association between scenography and the city, and we can go back as far as accounts of Renaissance theatre and Renaissance scenography to point to the correlation between scenic design, architects working as scenographers, synthesizing painting and architecture through the development of perspective, and allowing a manipulation and management of the appearance of the city as ordered and rational. So what's modelled on the theatre stage in Renaissance theatre seems to be a kind of a form of urban planning in the way that it models the ideal city and the compliant behaviour of its citizens. And today, the use of design as a tool of urban and commercial manipulation, the design of civic spaces or shopping malls, such as this one in Leeds, can't be ignored and remains influential as part of the staging of daily life that Gernot Böhmer has called a basic feature of our society. Leeds is replete with shopping centres. This is one of three in the city centre. So Gernot Böhmer says scenography actually offers a theoretical model for thinking about the theatricalization of everyday life. It manifests itself in things like sporting and cultural and political events, as well as in marketing and urban design. In particular, what Böhmer says is that scenography knows how to generate atmospheres through set design, light and sound, and how to attune audiences to a particular mood of a performance. And he uses as his example a lighting designer from the 1930s, Robert Kummerlen, and talks about the aesthetic principles of his scenography, where a light atmosphere modulates the stage space and lends all the objects within it a kind of unified and characteristic mood. So in that way of thinking, we can consider scenography as a craft for tuning spaces, creating ideal conditions for viewing performance or shopping, indeed. But the application of scenographic knowledge to understand design and reception of commercial events and urban spectacles, I think, falls on a rather narrow view of scenography as simply as a tool of suggestion and manipulation and control. and casts the public as mere observers and consumers. But I think meanwhile, it's clear that there's a field of interest now emerging in urban scenography that shows how scenography can become an agent for as a mode of critique and a way of reimagining urban space. So a couple of months ago, I organised a symposium looking at exactly this question about how urban scenography is manifesting itself in these different ways. And so I just wanted to acknowledge the range of people there that were speaking there that connect, I think, with what I'm saying today. So Dorita Hanna from New Zealand was talking about navigating urban scenographies of the real, talking about how on the one hand, where urban design might be considered to curtail and regulate, at the same time, scenographic performance, and she includes her own performances in that, can be a way to reveal a city's multiple histories and cultural mythologies. Marina Hadjiluka was talking about scenographic interventions in contested public spaces. She's done a lot of work in Cyprus and in the UK, and is thinking very much about that work as kind of social art and social transformation. One of the main things she's been doing there is creating a scenographic toolkit for designers and architects in that kind of work. Shauna Janssen, who I've quoted here, is based in Canada, in Montreal, and has been inviting artists to work with communities and using scenographic practice as a method of urban research and community engagement. And then finally, Rachel Hann. Sorry, I'm never sure if you can see these bits or not, has talked about the idea of scenographics. And this is, again, another way of thinking about scenography beyond simply designers designing for the stage. So thinking about scenographics as stagecraft that can be used to analyze material cultures, and also scenographics as a way of irritating disciplined orders of the world. So hopefully you can see there this kind of range of ways of thinking about scenography. Okay, so and also I wanted to say, so encompassed within all of this work that I've just briefly covered is an acknowledgement of the essentially co-creative nature of scenography as well. And I think this means noticing how places work on us, how we co-create place in conjunction with the materialities of the urban environment. So the things that I'm going to talk about now are actually places without specific interventions of designers or planners, but I think they are nonetheless just as influential and potent in their own ways. So I'm going to show quite a lot of images now, pictures I've taken while I've walked around Sheffield, and quite a lot of them under lockdown conditions. So these places, I think, are redolent of what Kathleen Stewart calls ordinary effects, animate circuits that conduct force and map connections, routes and disjunctures. They create atmospheres or small scenes that have the capacity to affect mood, imagination and bodily disposition. The ordinary effects of the urban make themselves felt when things seem to coalesce, and when there is what Stewart calls a sensation of something, that something is happening, and something emerging from the charged atmospheres of everyday life. So whilst acknowledging the ways in which design is complicit in directing and regulating people and their engagement with cities through large scale and grand architecture and urban planning projects, I want to focus on how the perspective of scenography is also useful in helping us become aware of the quotidian and the mundane, the various structures, textures, materials, and smells and sounds that are a constituent part of urban experience. In their book, Seeing Like a City, Armin and Thrift say cities are spatial radiations that gather worlds of atoms, atmospheres, symbols, bodies, buildings, plants, animals, technologies, infrastructures, and institutions. They are entities and networks involved there that are intersecting and colliding with each other. And I think this chimes really interestingly with what Sojaloka and Richard Goff were saying back in 2013 about what scenography is now, and defining it essentially as places where bodies and environments collide. They suggested that scenographic events don't rely on the presence of any predetermined scenography. It can be found, they said, in car parks in the middle of the ocean, on a cruise liner, on the top of a mountain, by spectators through a heightened sense of perception and co-creation. Under COVID-19, lockdowns have made us much more aware of our relationship with urban space. In almost empty cities, the sounds and smells and spatial configurations of familiar surroundings are bodied forth, and the sensory and material qualities of urban space have been made all the more apparent, heightening our awareness of the communicative and performative dimensions of cities. They seem to inform our relationship with urban space in ways that are similar to theatre scenography, where light, space and sound and materials inframe the embodied experience of performers and audiences, engendering particular atmospheres, affecting mood and bodily disposition. Oh, sorry, I've got out of sync with my images there. And I want to make sure you can see that one. There we are. Okay. So I'm going to just talk about two examples now in a little bit more detail. This is Waitrose entrance early in the morning, grandiose entrance, white colonnaded structure with a glazed roof and integral lighting. Early in the morning, before the supermarket is open, the white bulbs glow yellow against the deep blue early dawn sky and turn the whole thing golden, lending it, I think, an even more ironic sense of splendor than usual. And almost despite myself, as I'm walking down this structure, I'm enjoying the feeling of walking down the middle, standing a little bit taller than usual, aware of my pace and a slight lift in my step. Maybe the designers had something like that in mind, roughly speaking, but the scenographic impact of the city, I think, isn't limited to deliberate interventions. It's already there in ordinary everyday spaces, and maybe this is a slightly better example of that. Here, I think what I'm noticing is the double gabled building in the distance, which is kind of spotlit by the early morning sun. You can see the worn red bricks glowing orange through a sort of slightly hazy, moisture thickened air. It's like a bit of a beacon, I think, that's pulling me through along the curved path. And the low angle of the light is picking out the patched tarmac surface of the road. The orange glow of the bricks and the fainter glow of the sunrise make small points of contrast with the blue posts and graffiti. It's part of the city that's been under continuous change and repair over the last 10 years. Old buildings, 19th century cutlery works quite often have been converted into accommodation or pulled down and replaced. At this point, there's 2 temporary car parks in the street, marking space for future developments. There's a really strong sense of nothing seeming fixed or finished. Lisbeth Group-Niblink, who I think spoke in a previous seminar, has pointed out how scenography might be particularly well suited picking up the mundane and the trivial in our daily life. And she picks out particularly the material, the affective and relational ways of engaging with urban environments that scenography identifies. And I wanted to expand on that a little bit, because this is something that we, Scott and I, wrote about in our introductory chapter to Scenography Expanded. We talked about the relationality, the affectivity and the materiality. And I wanted to just talk about that now in relation to my topic of urban experience. So in terms of relationality, we're thinking very much of scenography being a structure that facilitates encounters between spectators and performers, or as well with other spectators and with other things, sites and spaces and materials. And drawing from Bourriar's idea of relational performance, very much a process rather than an artifact. Thinking about how that applies specifically to being in the city, I think it's to do with the presence of other people, what they're doing, how they're moving, also the proximity of buildings, their height, the width of a pavement or a doorway, the curve of a pavement, the way these relationships change as bodies move through them. Views open up, alleys close or narrow. In terms of affectivity, which in the book we were thinking about scenography often being something about more of a feeling or a suggestion rather than a particular message, and scenography becoming apparent not just through what you see, but through a whole array of senses and embodied understandings of the world. I think the application of this to the city here is to do with what Monica Dagan and Gillian Rose have talked about in terms of the sensory experience being central to the design of urban built environments, and that the observation that a social aesthetic perspective and an analysis of the sensual material life of objects and the subjects that interact with them, the way that sensual greets the sensorial body, and with the affective forces that are generated in such meetings really being a kind of central feature of our actual experience of being in the city. And then finally, in the focus on materiality, where in Scenography Expanded we're thinking about things and materials having a liveliness, or what Jane Bennett calls a thing power, not just solely dependent on human agents. And also thinking about scenography as a kind of assemblage of human and non-human material. In the city, I just wanted to contrast that as well with what Jane Bennett has talked about in her book, Vibrant Materials. And she has this really nice moment that she records of her own understanding of things coming together. So she records on a sunny Tuesday morning on the 4th of June in the grate over the storm drain to the Chesapeake Bay in front of Sam's Bagels. Sam's Bagels. On Cold Spring Lane in Baltimore, there was one large men's plastic work glove, one dense mat of oak pollen, one unblemished dead rat, one white plastic bottle cap, one smooth stick of wood. And she talks about the capacities of these bodies to make things happen, to produce effects, and through forming a tableau with each other and with the street and the weather. And she says, I caught a glimpse of an energetic vitality inside each of these things, an assemblage of vivid entities not entirely reducible to human contexts or the culture of objects and semiotics. Okay, so hopefully that's given a little bit more context there. I want to talk as well just now as well about a few more examples extending from the ones I've just given you. So this one is in lockdown on a route where I would normally be walking to work, but I'm working from home, just trying to be outside in the air and getting some exercise. I'm still really disorientated by lockdown and the unfolding pandemic. I was noticing, particularly when I took this image, the plastic mesh stretched across the scaffolding and the way it holds the light. It's kind of backlit. This and the structure, because of that, appears as a sort of mass of intersecting lines and angles that spill across the pavement and seem to dissolve its solidity, make it blend and connect with the surroundings, with the trees and the road. It's an ordinary place that's been profoundly transformed, and this is what's being dismantled here is an ugly kind of advertising structure, and it's being kind of transformed by the light and this mesh overnight into something really rather beautiful. I'm really surprised to see it there. This is London Road. I'm walking to Osmond's International Supermarket on a Saturday morning to get provisions. London Road's one of the most culturally diverse areas in Sheffield. There's a smell of petrol and shawarma kebab at the takeaway, which is just out of shot. There's a heavy leaden sky pressing down on the whole road. The tower block seems to push back against it. At street level, the strong summer sunlight that's highlighting the vivid colours of the smaller street level buildings and graffiti seem to have a more diffuse kind of energy. And the multicoloured flag bunting strung over Barry's Caribbean beer garden, flap languorously in the breeze. And then finally, this one. This is a rare walk to work on the under lockdown. Sunlight here is creating a really strong contrast between the an open bright space at the top of the stairs and the shadowy angular passage that needs to be negotiated to get there. It highlights the texture of the thick, hard concrete slabs on the wall and the low, heavy ceiling halfway up the stairs. I'm aware of looking towards the light, readying myself to climb and turn whilst being careful to place my feet safely on the steep, narrow steps with their clumsy, flaky yellow edges. I'm thinking about emerging into the bright sunlight, but also wondering what could be lurking in the dark recess. Oh, I can't quite see that yet. Dark recess halfway up. In early autumn, dead leaves often gather there. Previously, I've seen thick cardboard stashed there too. I think someone was sleeping there for a while. I can feel the brightness pulling me up physically and mentally, but that feeling is tempered by the awkward and shadowy space I have to pass through before I get there. So I think all of these scenes that I've described to you, and this is taking us back to Kathleen Stewart again, that speak to the idea of atmosphere formation and attentiveness to, sorry, I'll leave it on there for the moment, attentiveness to atmosphere. What Kathleen Stewart talks about as the intimate compositional process of dwelling in spaces that bear, that gestate, and that world. Each of these atmospheric moments can be communicated using a similar set of compositional concerns to theatrical scenography. So the elements of light and dark, colour, texture, structure, space, volume, scale, pattern, rhythm, temporality, all of these things seem to be useful in thinking about what's happening. And they're experienced in relation to the modifiers of movement, intensity, contrast, and transformation. In urban and outdoor settings, the elements that are traditional to theatre practice need to be expanded to include the weather, sunlight, cloud, moisture, and so on, and the seasons. And this second set of elements, as Tim Ingold says, are a reminder that people's relationship with the world is open, in the open, is immersive and dynamic. And he says the open world that people inhabit is not prepared for them in advance. It's continually coming into being around them. It's a world that is of formative and transformative processes. So I think the examples that I've given you from my walks seem to be an instance of the formation of atmosphere, and whether light as part of weather has a critical agency in these formations. But it's not self-contained, and it's not separate from the rest of the vibrant matter in these scenes. It's caught up, I think, as Tim Ingold puts it, in the creative potential of a world in formation, and caught up in a current of continual generation. In some of the examples, the weather's been a kind of metaphor that I've talked about, on the storm clouds on London Road, and the sunlight seemed to come into a sort of uneasy alignment with the buildings that's underscored by the social and cultural history of that place. And in this example here, the sunlight suggests some sort of relief or hopefulness, light at the end of the tunnel. However, the effect of these scenes is not only metaphorical, it also relates to the vibrancy of light and the vibrancy of the other elements. And it includes my sentient body as a process, as part of this process of atmosphere formation. Burma talks about atmospheres that are not things in themselves, but are floating in between, something between things and perceiving subjects. And this comes about through the ecstasy of things, the radiating presence of things. So, for example, he says, through colour, the thing asserts its presence in space and radiates into it. Through its colourfulness, the individual thing organises space as a whole, that is, and enters into constellations with other things. And Tim Edensaw writes about the way we see landscape, pointing out that constellations or entanglements of things, including the sensing body of the perceiver, becomes inextricably entangled with the landscape. As in theatre scenography, each of the examples contains to some degree an articulation of the way I'm positioned physically and effectively, and similar to the way a performer may feel enabled or encouraged or challenged by theatrical scenography. The way I place my feet in these examples, the line of my gaze, the feeling of the proximity of buildings or walls, the trajectory of pathways, all make an impression and exert an effect on me, which in turn affects the way I pay attention to the ecstasy of the things that surround me. In the illuminated Waitrose colonnade, for example, I'm aware of the channeling effect of the structure on my measured walking and the ugly yellow light falling on my hooded face. And there's a tension between how I'm moving and how this might look to an external observer, and how I'm feeling internally. In contrast, the scaffolding example, the effect on me is one of empathy or alignment with the atmosphere. I feel myself joining with the ecstasy of the light, the mesh, and the scaffolding in a temporary constellation of unexpected beauty and calm. So mostly we pass through these spaces without paying attention to their qualities. But what if we pay more attention and we think about ways in which we could use that paying of attention to research further into individuals' experience of cities. So I have been trying to test these ideas out with other people and see how far we could use these as tools to investigate the way in which environments affect individuals. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about a pilot workshop that I did, thinking about how might scenographic attunement help recognize and resist dominant narratives of urban space and construct alternative subjectivities. So I invited a range of researchers, of people with research, a range of different research interests to take part in this half-day workshop. The people attending had backgrounds in theatre directing, actor training, and dance, and in architecture, in sociology, in urban planning and transport, and in climate change. So quite a range of different outlooks. The first part of the workshop was an acclimatization to the way in which scenography might help us notice the effects that I've just been talking about. So I talked a little bit about those ideas, and then I led a walk around the University of Leeds campus, and I asked people to notice air temperature, light, weather, scent, sounds, their own bodily contact with the ground and surfaces, textures, structures, openings or escapes, scale, viewpoint, frames, layers, relationships, and so on. I said to them, maybe think about what is it that I'm drawn to or repelled by in the environment? Where do I feel comfortable or welcome or invited? Where do I feel wary or cautious? When and how does the environment connect with my mood? When and how does the environment change me? What do I notice about the composition of the environment? Are there patterns or rhythms or echoes? Are there things out of place? Is there a feeling of something that has just happened or something that is just about to happen? I left them to their own devices for a while and then asked them to bring back their observations and experiences, and many of these are recorded in images, in photographic images, as is my own work. So a few of examples here, just so that I can give you a flavour of the discussion that we had following that. So people were noticing walkways and openings around the campus that frame their view or direct their attention. They were thinking about the idea of a kind of backstage of the parts of the campus that weren't supposed to be looked at, but were nonetheless there and very important in terms of an overall atmosphere. They were thinking about noticing things that seemed strange or out of place. These rather mysterious looking pyramid-shaped skylights that sit at ground level, very curious items. And then in terms of a sense of things that might happen, somebody was really taken by the size and the colour of these rubbish skips and the fact that there's some steam coming out of a nearby lab, a science lab, and started them thinking about a movie that might take place. They're thinking about zombies appearing and that kind of thing. So in the discussion afterwards, we were thinking about ways of looking, ways of maybe being a distant observer on the one hand, or an active performer on another. And then there was a third way as well, which is of just being there, of just being with the environment. So people talked about standing apart from and observing at a distance, as though it were framed as a performance, but contrarily noticing how the environment makes you feel or move, the way that you're drawn to comfortable spaces. It was a very hot day on one of the workshops. And on that day, people were really feeling very much that they wanted to be in the shadow, talking about walking along a curved edge of a flower bed, the vertiginous feel of those concrete steps that I mentioned before, and also a sense of feeling out of place, in the wrong place, not necessarily welcome. There's places where it seems like you're invited to be, and then other places where where that's not the case. And then finally, this idea of letting the world wash over you, and creating an awareness of our capacity to connect to a space and fade into the background. So we're not necessarily always the center of attention. Let that happen and giving space to that noticing. In the next part of the workshop, I asked then people to use some very simple modeling techniques to see if they could focus in on and capture their sense of how the environment was working on them, or what they were particularly noticing. So it was an exercise really in being able to kind of edit things out from maybe the photographs that they'd gotten, to accentuate or to exaggerate some of the feelings that they had and explore those imaginatively and creatively. So here's an example of from somebody who knows the campus well, but as part of the kind of orientation exercise was really for the first time, I think, noticing just how much green there is on campus, and just how large and important that kind of space becomes. He said he's so used to walking about the campus in a really purposeful way and not paying attention to the surroundings. But this exercise made him think about how we focus on those kinds of architectures and features that are deliberately designed to draw our attention, and ignore the other things like the plants and the trees, which now in this exercise he was able to show as a kind of much more important part of the campus. This one is a person who described feeling actually overwhelmed by information during his observation. And he was trying desperately to get a little bit of distance on it. And in the model, you can see he's placed himself right at the very end of the model. And he was in an outdoor space with quite a lot of greenery, but it's kind of hemmed in on all sides by large university buildings. The red shape in here is really interesting. It's kind of curls and waves that reflect how the space felt enfolding and suffocating. And I think the red particularly refers to waves of heat coming off the building. And he described it as being as though things were struggling to breathe. This is an area called the Tetley Garden. It's kind of based on a sort of circular courtyard space. And one participant focused on this space, and she was really aware of the sound shaping her experience, the way that this circular space modifies sound. And she created this thing that you can wear. It's like a sort of Elizabethan headdress or something from Game of Thrones. But as the card bends and moves near her ears, it works a little bit like the actual space worked on her, isolating and focusing sound in a particular way. As well as individuals modeling, using modeling to explore their relationship, there was quite a productive discussion amongst the groups of each other's models, and extending that sense of reflection and proposing kind of new lines of thinking about the spaces. So this is a model that started from an observation of an elevated walkway. It was emphasizing the idea of precarity and isolation. Oh, hang on, this is the one, sorry, that's the wrong slide. Emphasize this walkway here and emphasizing that kind of almost impossible kind of sense of these very thin legs holding up this walkway. But it became then a discussion about these people in the offices kind of looking at each other, and a discussion about who were these people, how had they got there. There was this sense of observed and being observing and being observed, and even a discussion then about how had this person here come to occupy that office on their own, and thinking about kind of the idea of men in high places and surveying the kind of the rest of the activity. So these were, as you can see, these were kind of quite, hang on, that's where I want to get to. Yeah, these were kind of early kind of ideas about noticing how the environments work on those people, and just starting really to think about how modelling might move us forward in that. Reflecting on the workshop, some participants said that it would make them notice the environment and its effect on them in general. Some talked about how they found themselves to be attuned. One was saying she was drawn to the irony of objects in the environment, particularly things seeming out of place. Others were primarily focused on themselves in relation to other people in space, and noticing especially how space affords different kinds of social interaction. So there were very many ways, I think, in which people were responding to this kind of this exercise. And I think the modelling allowed further exploration and processing of these feelings, even where participants felt frustrated with modelling and felt they had failed to capture what they'd set out to create. The talk that accompanied the attempt to make the model, I think, was really revealing and useful in bringing out the things that they had been noticing and feeling. So thinking about the approaches outlined here might offer an understanding of being in cities, and as I was saying earlier, the growing body of work that aims to explore how the embodied inhabitation of spaces feels. Monica Dagan, who I mentioned earlier, has done a really interesting project on move on to that now. Has done a really interesting project on Smithfield Market, and the importance of the sensory there, using walk-alongs and photo-elicitation to explore people's multi-sensory experience of living and working in that space at a time of change. And I think what she says about that connects, or I can connect the things that I'm doing or I'm exploring here to that. She says space is made up of a series of material, social and political elements that momentarily coalesce in the particular experiences of places for individuals. And I think that's what I'm particularly concerned to try and pinpoint is how you can use these kinds of experiences to think about how things are quite different. The same places can be quite different for individuals. So I think the approach outlined here can make a contribution. And as I say, yes, it emphasizes how people's experience of the same space can be highly individualized. There's these coalescences of space and individual coming together are contingent upon different personal and social circumstances, obviously, but that includes the way that people imaginatively connect to places and are able to see familiar places anew using these kinds of perspectives. So I think scenography supports the recognition of how spaces appear as constructed as composed, how light and sound modulate spaces over time, how the coalescence of materials might lead to a feeling of something about to happen, a place of safety and comfort, or a challenging and difficult space. Going forward, I want to explore this further with the application of scenography as a method and a tool in interdisciplinary research. So I've been talking to sociologists and planners and people interested in urban communication, for example, to try and take this knowledge out into a more interdisciplinary space. Thinking about urban atmospheres as scenographies, I think focuses on scenographic practice takes full account of the liveliness and vibrancy of materials and the entanglement of perceiving bodies. And as Rachel Hann has argued, scenographics exceed what it is that scenographers do, and describes the relationships between bodies that enact a distinct form of place orientation. I'm just going to move here to this now. So using scenographic sensibilities, we can explore urban experience through attuning ourselves to the elements of our surroundings. Can practice the scenographic practice and theory can illuminate effective and embodied experience of space in conjunction with understanding about socio-spatial aspects of urban design and visual, multimodal and material communication. And I think it can make an interesting contribution to understanding, particularly post-lockdown relationships between people and urban environments. I think it's about acknowledging the potent materiality of the urban and a way of engaging imaginatively with how things appear to us, how they feel to us, and consequently, how they might be different. Okay, that's the end of my talk. Thank you.